Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. What if I told you the world we live in today was shaped by an era defined by corsets, coal, and conquest? The Victorian era, spanning from 1837 to 1901, was a transformative period in British history marked by rapid industrialization, scientific breakthroughs, and global imperialism. Named after Queen Victoria, whose reign lasted over 6 decades, this era witnessed the United Kingdom rising to the height of its global influence. Under her rule, Britain experienced unmatched progress in industry and infrastructure, with steam engines powering factories and railways linking distant parts of the country. At the same time, the British Empire expanded across continents, asserting its dominance over territories in Africa, Asia, and beyond. This was not just a time of technological growth, but also of strict social norms, artistic innovation, and profound political changes that continue to shape modern society. Queen Victoria was born Alexandrina Victoria in 1819, the daughter of Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. Her rise to power was unexpected. She was fifth in line to the throne and only became queen after a series of royal deaths left her as the only legitimate heir. At just 18 years old, she ascended the throne in 1837, a young woman suddenly tasked with leading a powerful but politically divided kingdom. Despite her youth and inexperience, Victoria quickly became a unifying figure and a symbol of stability. Her reign marked a shift from the scandal-ridden monarchies of the past to a more respectable and moral image of the crown. Victoria embodied the values of duty, family, and empire, which resonated deeply with the British public and helped solidify the monarchy's place in a rapidly changing society. When she began her reign, Britain was in the midst of political tension. The country was grappling with the effects of the Industrial Revolution, and the gap between the wealthy elite and the working class was widening. Parliament was evolving, with power gradually shifting from the monarchy to elected officials. The Reform Act of 1832 had already extended voting rights to more men, and debates over further reforms were ongoing. It was a time of both excitement and uncertainty, and Queen Victoria's ascent to the throne came at a pivotal moment in British political and social life. The Victorian era coincided with the Second Industrial Revolution, a period of remarkable technological and industrial innovation that transformed nearly every aspect of daily life. At the heart of this transformation was the steam engine, which revolutionized transportation and manufacturing. Railroads rapidly expanded across Britain, linking cities and countryside, enabling goods and people to move faster than ever before. The train became a symbol of progress, shrinking distances and accelerating the pace of life. Communication also saw a dramatic leap forward with the invention of the telegraph. For the first time in history, messages could be sent across long distances in minutes rather than days. Telegraph lines connected cities and even continents, laying the foundation for a more interconnected world and playing a crucial role in empire management, business, and journalism. Electricity began to enter public life with the advent of electric lighting, which slowly started replacing gas lamps in the latter part of the century. Alongside this came inventions like the typewriter, which revolutionized office work, and photography, which changed the way people documented and viewed the world. These technologies not only improved efficiency, but also reshaped culture and communication. The factory system grew rapidly, drawing masses of people from rural areas into cities in search of work. Urban centers expanded rapidly, often outpacing infrastructure, leading to overcrowded housing and poor sanitation. Still, industrial jobs provided new economic opportunities, and cities became vibrant hubs of commerce, innovation, and cultural exchange. Life in Victorian Britain was no longer tied to the rhythms of the countryside. It was now governed by the factory whistle and the ticking of the clock. Under Queen Victoria's reign, the British Empire expanded to become the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Colonialism and imperialism were central to this expansion, driven by the desire for economic gain, strategic dominance, and a belief in the supposed superiority of British civilization. Territories across the globe were claimed, governed, and reshaped under British rule, with Queen Victoria herself becoming Empress of India in 1876, a symbolic reflection of the empire's vast reach. India was considered the jewel in the crown of the British Empire due to its immense resources and strategic importance. However, British control did not go unchallenged. In 1857, the Indian Rebellion erupted, sparked by deep cultural and religious tensions, as well as widespread resentment of British policies. Though the revolt was eventually suppressed, it marked a turning point. The British government took direct control of India from the East India Company, intensifying imperial oversight. In China, the Opium Wars, 1839, 1842, and 1856-1860, were fought over Britain's right to trade opium, leading to the Treaty of Nanking and the cession of Hong Kong to Britain. These conflicts highlighted the aggressive tactics the empire was willing to use to maintain economic dominance. Meanwhile, in Africa, the late 19th century saw the scramble for Africa as European powers, including Britain, rushed to claim territory. Britain established control over vast regions, including Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria, often using military force and diplomatic pressure. Colonization in Africa was marked by exploitation, extraction of resources, and the drawing of artificial borders that would have long-term consequences. Missionaries played a significant role in the imperial project, spreading Christianity and promoting British values such as industry, discipline, and civilization. Their efforts were often portrayed as noble and moral, though they were deeply intertwined with the goals of empire and frequently undermined or erased indigenous cultures. For many, British imperialism brought profound disruption and hardship, even as it claimed to bring progress and order. Victorian society was defined by rigid and deeply entrenched class divisions. At the top stood the aristocracy, landed elites and nobles who wielded immense influence, followed by the rapidly growing middle class made up of industrialists, merchants, professionals, and bureaucrats. At the bottom were the working poor, who labored in factories, mines, and domestic service, often living in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. Social expectations were strict, especially for those aspiring to be part of the respectable middle class. The Victorian gentleman was expected to be disciplined, moral, and hardworking, while the proper lady was idealized as modest, graceful, and devoted to home and family. These gender roles were heavily promoted through literature, education, and etiquette guides, shaping how people behaved and interacted in both public and private life. Despite the image of refinement, the reality for much of the population was harsh. Child labor was widespread, with children working long hours in dangerous conditions in factories, mines, and as chimney sweeps. Those who fell into poverty had few options. Workhouses, introduced under the Poor Laws, offered food and shelter, but were deliberately made grim and humiliating to discourage reliance on public aid. Women, particularly in the middle and upper classes, were expected to stay within the domestic sphere. Yet, the Victorian era also saw the early stirrings of the feminist movement. Women began organizing for education, property rights, and suffrage. Figures like Mary Wollstonecraft had laid the groundwork earlier, but now activists like Josephine Butler and Millicent Fawcett were challenging the legal and social restrictions placed on women. Though progress was slow, these efforts planted the seeds for the major advances in women's rights that would follow in the 20th century. The Victorian era was a golden age for culture and intellectual advancement, producing some of the most influential literature, art, and ideas in modern history. Writers like Charles Dickens brought attention to the struggles of the working class through vivid storytelling, highlighting issues like poverty, injustice, and child labor in novels such as Oliver Twist and Hard Times. The Bronte sisters, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, explored themes of identity, passion, and gender roles, while Oscar Wilde captivated audiences with his wit, satire, and critiques of social hypocrisy in works like The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Earnest. In the arts, the Gothic revival style became prominent, reflected in grand ornate buildings like the Houses of Parliament. The 1851 Great Exhibition showcased Britain's industrial achievements in the spectacular Crystal Palace, a symbol of Victorian pride and innovation. Music also flourished, with the popularity of both classical compositions and public music, halls that brought entertainment to the masses. One of the most groundbreaking intellectual shifts of the era came with Charles Darwin's publication of On the Origin of Species in 1859. His theory of evolution challenged traditional religious views and sparked intense debate across scientific, religious, and philosophical circles. The idea that species evolved through natural selection shook the foundations of Victorian belief systems and redefined humanity's place in the natural world. Meanwhile, education underwent significant reform. The Elementary Education Act of 1870 marked the beginning of compulsory schooling for children, aiming to create a more literate and disciplined workforce. This push for public education reflected the era's belief in progress and moral improvement, and it laid the groundwork for broader access to knowledge and upward social mobility. The Victorian era was a time of remarkable scientific progress, particularly in the fields of medicine and public health. One of the most significant advancements was the introduction of anesthesia in the 1840s, which revolutionized surgery by allowing patients to undergo complex procedures without the agony of pain. Soon after, Joseph Lister's use of antiseptics in the 1860s drastically reduced post-surgical infections, making surgery much safer and more effective. These breakthroughs marked the beginning of modern surgical practices and helped shift medicine from a risky endeavor to a more scientific and systematic profession. Another critical development was the acceptance of germ theory, advanced by scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. Their discoveries demonstrated that microscopic organisms were responsible for disease, challenging older beliefs about miasmas, or bad air. This new understanding led to improved hygiene practices and public health reforms. Cities began implementing better sanitation systems, including clean water supplies and sewage networks, significantly reducing the spread of diseases like cholera and typhoid. The Victorian era also witnessed a surge in scientific exploration and curiosity about the natural world. Figures like Charles Darwin, who had traveled aboard the HMS Beagle, continued to study biology, geology, and the origins of life. Meanwhile, explorers such as David Livingstone ventured into uncharted parts of Africa, driven by a mix of scientific interest, religious mission, and imperial ambition. Their journeys not only expanded European knowledge of distant lands, but also fed the era's fascination with discovery and the limits of human understanding. Victorian science laid the groundwork for the modern age, blending empirical investigation with a deep-seated belief in progress and human potential. While the British Empire reached unprecedented heights during the Victorian era, it was not without fierce resistance and growing criticism. In colonies across the globe, people pushed back against British control through uprisings, protests, and armed rebellions. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 was one of the most significant examples, sparked by resentment toward British rule, disrespect for local customs, and harsh economic policies. In Africa, resistance movements challenged British incursions, from the Zulu kingdom in the south to uprisings in Egypt and Sudan. These acts of defiance were often met with brutal suppression. Imperial ideology was deeply rooted in racism and a belief in British superiority. Social Darwinism, a distortion of Charles Darwin's theory, was used to justify colonial rule, promoting the idea that white Europeans were more evolved and destined to rule over others. This pseudoscientific racism became a core part of the empire's justification, shaping how colonized peoples were treated and represented. The economic impact of empire on the colonies was largely exploitative. Natural resources, labor, and wealth were extracted and redirected to fuel Britain's industrial and economic growth. Local economies were reshaped to serve British interests, often destroying traditional industries and ways of life. Cultural practices, languages, and social structures were frequently undermined or erased through policies of assimilation and control. Back in Britain, the morality of empire sparked growing debate. While many saw imperialism as a source of national pride and economic benefit, others began to question its human cost. Critics, including writers, politicians, and religious leaders, condemned the violence, inequality, and moral contradictions of the imperial project. The Victorian era may have been an age of conquest and confidence, but it also sowed the seeds of anti-colonial movements and a growing awareness of empire's dark legacy. Queen Victoria's death in 1901 marked the end of an era, both literally and symbolically. Her passing closed the chapter on a reign that had lasted over 63 years, during which Britain transformed from a relatively insular kingdom into a global superpower. As the 20th century dawned, the world was beginning to shift. Other nations, particularly Germany and the United States, were rising in industrial and military power, signaling an end to Britain's unchallenged dominance. The close of the Victorian era did not mean the end of its influence. Its ideas, innovations, and institutions continued to shape the modern world. The era had given rise to the modern city, laid the foundation for global communication networks, and sparked debates about democracy, gender, race, and class that still resonate today. From the steam engine to the theory of evolution, from public education to early feminism, the legacy of the Victorian period is embedded in the structures and values of contemporary society. It was an age of contradiction, marked by both incredible progress and profound inequality, but one that undeniably helped define the modern age. The Victorian era was a time of extraordinary innovation and empire building. It saw groundbreaking advances in technology, steam engines, railways, telegraphs, and medicine that reshaped everyday life and connected the world like never before. At the same time, Britain's imperial reach expanded to control vast territories, profoundly affecting millions of lives across continents. Yet this era was also marked by stark social inequalities, rigid class structures, and the exploitation of colonized peoples. The lasting impact of the Victorian period can be seen in today's technology, social institutions, and global geopolitics. Many of the ideas, inventions, and political systems that emerged then continue to influence how societies function and interact on the world stage. But the era also raises difficult questions about the costs of progress and the human toll of empire. So, as we look back on this complex chapter of history, I leave you with this question. Was the Victorian era truly a time of progress, or was it a gilded age of exploitation? What do you think? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Victorian world, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories from history.